Israel Adesanya has had some truly outstanding moments in the octagon. Since joining the UFC in 2018, he has never lost a fight at middleweight. And out of the 23 wins in his professional career, 15 of those have come via knockout. That's why today we're breaking down the Last Stylebender's best finishes. So sit back and relax as we take you through the best knockouts and finishes from one of the most exciting strikers MMA has ever seen. First up, Rob Wilkinson at UFC 221. Adesanya was coming into UFC 221 with an 11-fight win streak. Not only that, but all of those wins had also come with a knockout. He had fought across several different promotions and earned himself 2 championship belts. But this fight was different. He was debuting at the UFC on the biggest stage in MMA. The event was headlined by Yoel Romero and Luke Rockhold, taking place in Australia against hometown hero Rob Wilkinson. But the Aussies were in for a shock. After touching gloves and stepping into the ring, Adesanya started to gain some distance with his razor-sharp striking. Wilkinson put Izzy up against the fence with some strong grappling and saw the first round out without any major damage. But then came the second round, and Adesanya started to kick into gear. His left-handed straight punch was far too quick and caught Wilkinson again and again. In classic Izzy style, he continued to beat Wilkinson down while taunting him. The Australian tried to weather the storm, but it was all too much. Stumbling from side to side against the fence, the referee was forced to put a stop to the beatdown. In his post-fight interview, Adesanya had a message for the big players in the UFC. He said, "You act like you don't know me. Well, you know who I am now." Next up, Derek Brunson at UFC 230. Derek Brunson is not a fighter to be taken lightly. He has built bags full of experience since his first UFC fight in 2013. He's knocked out Uriah Hall and Lyoto Machida. That alone is reason enough to fear him. So when his name appeared next to Adesanya's on the lineup of UFC 230, fans knew this wouldn't be an easy one for the Last Stylebender. Brunson knew what he had to do early on. He tried to lock the fight up with grappling and neutralize Adesanya's vicious striking. The clinch broke up, and Brunson tried another couple of takedowns which weren't as effective. Adesanya broke from the grips of Brunson towards the end of the first round as his opponent chased after him. That's when Izzy landed a devastating knee to Brunson's head, which stunned him and changed the whole momentum of the fight after another few knees and kicks for good measure. The final strike was a left hook, at which point Herb Dean called a stop to the fight. Izzy did one of his dances at the center of the octagon while Brunson tried to figure out what had just happened. Now we have Melvin Guillard at AFC 20. 5 years ago, not many UFC fans had heard the name Israel Adesanya, but he was about to have a big night in his career. He was taking on Melvin Guillard for the AFC Middleweight Championship. Guillard is a former UFC fighter who made it there through the Ultimate Fighter series and had a mixed record of 12 wins and 9 losses. But some of those losses were against names like Nate Diaz, Donald Cerrone, and Justin Gaethje, so who can blame him? Having fought with some of the best fighters in the business, Guillard was Adesanya's first big test of his career. 2 minutes into a chaotic first round, and Izzy almost secured a submission before Guillard slipped out. But he was clearly injured and slowing down. Adesanya took full advantage and slammed him into the canvas before landing knees and kicks and putting an early finish to the fight via TKO. Even in just 1 round of fighting, Adesanya showcased some of his trademark kickboxing skills that he would use to propel himself into the UFC. And having completely dominated a former UFC fighter, the fight got him some attention from Dana White. And now, Kelvin Gastelum at UFC 236. The next one isn't exactly a knockout, but it was a very important finish in Adesanya's career. Just over 2 months after taking out Anderson Silva, Adesanya was back in the octagon and ready for the biggest fight of his young career. After 5 fights in the UFC, he now had a chance to get his hands on the interim middleweight championship. He was fighting Kelvin Gastelum, who was going to make sure that Adesanya earned every part of that championship. This was the fight that showed how strong a fighter Izzy really is, because nothing came easy. Both of them were desperate for the win, and Gastelum came out swinging, knocking down Adesanya early on and putting him on the back foot. But Izzy soon recovered and knocked Gastelum down. The fight went back and forth several times, with neither of them able to finish their opponent off, producing one of the greatest title fights of all time. The judges scored it unanimously in Adesanya's favor, but that didn't reflect how close a contest it was. Gastelum was just a few strikes away from finishing the fight himself, but Adesanya was able to scramble away in time and prove himself the better fighter of the night. Adesanya went on to beat Robert Whittaker for the middleweight title, while Gastelum's career has gone downhill, only winning 1 fight in the last 3 years. It looks like that fight was a turning point for both of them. Adesanya came out of that night as a much stronger and more resilient fighter. Up next, how did Adesanya take out his biggest rival? And which finish caused his opponent to call him human trash? So don't go anywhere. Next on the list, Robert Whittaker at UFC 243. Adesanya has been in a class above other fighters in the middleweight division. His closest competition has been Robert Whittaker, who he has already defeated twice. And the first time they met, it was for the unification of the middleweight belt. Adesanya had just defeated Kelvin Gastelum to win the interim championship, while Whittaker was unlucky that interim title holder Yoel Romero missed weight when they faced off at UFC 213. Whittaker still won the bout, but it set up a high-stakes fight with Adesanya for the glory of the middleweight division. In front of a huge audience of 57,000 people in Melbourne, Australia, Adesanya took less than 2 rounds to take Whittaker out in his own backyard. Izzy was all over Whittaker in the first round and heading to a finish in the first round before the bell rang. In the second round, he didn't make any mistakes, dodging all of Whittaker's attacks before stunning him in a wild exchange that sent the Australian stumbling to the floor. It was a close-range, left-handed hook that ended the fight, but the finish was inevitable. Adesanya claimed the title and took his rightful position at the top of the division, and he hasn't moved since. The only potential threat in the future seems to be his old rival, Alex Pereira. Now for Andrew Flores-Smith at Glory of Heroes 2. Asia has some of the best MMA promotions on the planet. For decades, countries like Japan and China have been revolutionizing the sport. And it's where many fighters go to cut their teeth. And in May of 2016, that's what a young Israel Adesanya was doing. He was facing Andrew Flores-Smith in Shenzhen, China, and had already fought in the country 3 times before. And as with all of Adesanya's fights, it was exciting from the beginning. The seasoned kickboxer outkicked and outpunched Flores to slowly wear him down. Keeping up with the pace of Adesanya and trying to defend is too exhausting for most fighters. And it was the same for Flores. By the end of the first round, Adesanya had him cornered and finished off with some ground and pound. Flores was exhausted in his corner, which led to his corner throwing in the towel. That was the best decision they could have made. And now, Paulo Costa at UFC 253. It's 2020, and Israel Adesanya is on top of the world. He knocked out Whittaker to win the middleweight title and followed it up with a win over Yoel Romero. His next title defense is against Brazilian Paulo Costa, who just defeated Romero as well. Just like Adesanya, Costa is undefeated in his MMA career, including 5 fights in the UFC. The first round is pretty uneventful. There are plenty of leg and body kicks while the two fight for distance. The second round gets off to the same rhythm, but after a few exchanges, it's clear who is taking heavier hits. Costa is bleeding from his face and starting to slow down. That's when Adesanya pounces, countering with a right-left combination that floors Costa. From there, Adesanya gets on top and continues to throw bombs at a defenseless Costa, causing an early finishing. If the win wasn't bad enough, Adesanya made a humping motion to Costa as he was getting up. That was seemingly payback for the months of trash-talking in the lead-up to the fight. After the fight, Costa called Adesanya human trash and demanded a rematch immediately. That wasn't on the cards for him. In fact, Adesanya temporarily left the whole division, moving up to light heavyweight to suffer his only MMA loss to Jan Blachowicz. But now Adesanya is back in his weight class and more dominant than ever. Which finish was your favorite? And how much longer do you think Adesanya can dominate the middleweight division? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in the next one.